starting in 1995, I was just practicing law, as any young lawyer would do with a young family here in Montreal. And I seemed to have some signs and symptoms of something. I didn't know what it was, but ultimately did a colonoscopy and found that I had colon cancer. And not only did I have colon cancer, but it had spread to my liver. And subsequently, I found out that it had also spread to my lungs. So it was a challenging time in Quebec, as it is now, in order to get timely access to the appropriate care. Of course, at that time, we only had one drug called 5-FU in order to treat colon cancer, which had been used for about 40 years with limited success. And my cancer had already metastasized, so it was stage 4. Had trouble in Montreal getting surgery and ended up in a timely manner and ended up having to leave the country and have my first of several liver surgeries, which was actually uncommon in itself to chase cancer at that time through surgery in New York City. And followed up each surgery with a PET scan, which is something that was almost unheard of in Canada, except in 2 centers and mostly for research purposes. But after 4 surgeries on my liver in New York, which was quite incredible, even just by saying that to people at that time. Today it's relatively commonplace to have multiple liver surgeries. And then having done an experimental vaccine out in California, I found that I had no evidence of disease. So a lot of work went into that and started with some very basic chemotherapy, the 5-FU, and started some trials in Montreal, in addition to the vaccine trial that I did out in California. So that was my first sort of integration into clinical trials, or learning about clinical trials and getting that started actually in the year 2000, when all the computers were going to crash and we had to write special protocols because the world was coming to an end as the clock swept 12 into the new year. But of course, nothing happened, and a lot of work went into that. And unfortunately, after doing all that hard work, I found that it had actually metastasized to my lungs. So started getting the trials going here in Canada on oxaliplatin at the time, and proceeded with some lung surgery. But as you can imagine, having left the country for this surgery was very, very expensive. And I ended up having to sue the Quebec government, RAMQ, for reimbursement for an extensive amount of money for these surgeries, and ultimately won those cases in the Superior Court, and it became a landmark decision for out-of-country healthcare. And so I was launched into the world of advocacy, just trying to cure myself, but then found myself in the middle of litigation, which fortunately turned out well. And the surgeries turned out well, so I was able to pursue not only my law career at that time, but the beginning of what became Colorectal Cancer Canada, Canada's Colorectal Cancer Patient Association. So then, after that, in 1998, actually, I should have started off by saying, I think I said maybe that I was 40 at the beginning. I just turned 41. And today we sort of reflect on that and saying, well, that's unusual, but the fastest growing cohort of colon cancer patients today, or colorectal cancer patients today, is that subgroup. It's something that we didn't think about. We just said, well, for some unexplained reason, this person at 40 years old, or 41, just turning 41, had colon cancer, and it just seemed like an anomaly. Whereas today, we see, that there may be some other reasons for it, and we're doing research to the microbiome and so forth in order to understand the causes. But in 1998, we started what at that time was Colorectal Cancer Association of Canada, with some of the grandfathers of oncology in Canada, Tony Fields and Jean Maroon in Ottawa, Tony Fields in Alberta, and a wonderful group of volunteer board. And we grew our organization from there. Today, it's the leading colorectal cancer patient-led organization in the country, and we do a lot of work internationally as well, both in the obvious areas that touch the public at large for prevention, in terms of screening programs and getting those started across the country. And we still are working on Quebec and Nunavut to get those going, but working in the National Colorectal Cancer Screening Network to do that. And then everything through the patient journey, as you would say, from diagnosis all the way through treatment until either survivorship or palliative care for end of life. So these are some of the areas that we work in, but we also work nationally in two other trajectories, and one is in the drug development and diagnostic development area. So everything from ideation of a clinical trial to the recruitment, retention, development of protocols, following the patients through clinical trials, patient preference studies, collection of real-world data and real-world evidence, so that we can submit this type of information back to health technology assessment bodies such as CADTH and INESS, in order to ensure that patients across the country have equitable access to the latest advances and treatments that are also the most effective ones. And then we, of course, get involved in areas in our third trajectory of general health policy in Canada. And that might be access, for example, to molecular profiling, or questions as to what might impede the development of clinical trials in Canada or research in Canada, such as changes to the Patent and Medicine Price Review Board, or the time to patient, for example, the time it takes for a drug to go through the regulatory and HTA process, so that patients can get it on the formulary until they get that actual drug, which can take a couple of years, actually, until it goes through that process. But by and large, we're also really focused on some of the new precision medicines in colon cancer, but in cancer in general. And in order to do that, we're very focused on the way clinical trials are done, the need for different types of clinical trials, because through molecular profiling, we can look at smaller and smaller subgroups of patients. And in order to get those patients, we need a more decentralized approach, an umbrella type of approach. We need to see new types of adaptive trials that could be utilized in order to access some of these new precision medicines, and then look at the regulatory and HTA bodies and talk about conditional acceptance of these type of new products subject to the collection of real-world data. So it really is a big circle of work that has to be done, from initiating and ideating the clinical trials to collecting the data, understanding how we could put real-world evidence frameworks within the clinical trial so that it's followed up post-trial, and also collect those patient preferences along the way.